Good evening. This afternoon, Governor Andrew Cuomo delivered his first State of the State address, a tough love dose of medicine for a state suffering from both fiscal woes and a dysfunctional democracy. He unveiled what he called an emergency financial plan to save the state from defaulting on its bills. We will deconstruct this speech in a minute, after which Brooklyn Borough President Marty Markowitz will join us to begin our special series on the state of the 5 boroughs. And after politics, we'll look at the wide influence of video games, then your personal genomics. Do we really want to know what our DNA says about us? But first, the state of the state. The governor began with the bad news.
The state begins with an honest analysis of the crisis that we face. In government, as in life, you can never solve a problem if you refuse to acknowledge it. The economic recession has taken an especially hard hit on the state of New York. 2009, we had a 26-year high in unemployment. Roughly 800,000 New Yorkers are now unemployed. Hundreds of thousands more are underemployed. We have the worst business tax climate in the nation, period. Our taxes are 66% higher than the national average. Upstate is truly an economic crisis. In real GDP from 2001 to 2006, upstate New York grew about 1.7% per year, while the average in the nation was 2.7%. The costs of pensions are exploding. $1.3 billion in 1999, projected for 2013, $6.2 billion, a 476% increase, and it's only getting worse. The state of New York spends too much money. It is that blunt, and it is that simple. Our spending has far exceeded the rate of inflation. From 1994 to 2009, inflation was about 2.7% per year. Medicaid went up over 5% per year, and education went up over 6% per year. We just can't afford those rates of increase. State spending actually outpaced income growth. State spending increased just under 6%. Personal income growth was only 3.8%. And most damaging, our expenses in this state far exceed revenue. We've been focusing on this year and the deficit this year, which is a very large deficit, about $10 billion. And that is a problem, and it is a major problem. What's worse is it's not just about this year. Next year, the problem goes to $14 billion. The year after, the deficit goes to $17 billion. This is not a one-year problem, my friends. This is a fundamental economic realignment for the state of New York.
Governor Cuomo from the State of the State this afternoon. Now, after that list of what's wrong, the governor spoke about solutions like capping local real estate taxes and reinventing Medicaid. He explained this was no ordinary job, but one for the history books.
And I am going to present the budget in several weeks. But this year's budget discussion is not just about a budget exercise. That's what those numbers are saying. This is a fundamental realignment for this state. You can't make up these kinds of savings over this long a period of time through a budget cutting or trimming exercise. We're going to have to reinvent government. We're going to have to reorganize the agencies. We're going to have to redesign our approach because the old way wasn't working anyway. Let's be honest.
So, does Governor Andrew Cuomo's plan meet the fiscal challenge? What are the political obstacles? Can Albany be made functional again? With us to reflect on the art of the possible is Ben Smith of Politico. His popular blogs cover both New York and national affairs. Hi, Ben. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
So, have you posted on this yet? What's your headline?
You know, I thought the line that most struck me in his speech actually was that he sort of echoed this line that got Obama's people in a lot of trouble at the beginning of the year, that in every crisis there's an opportunity. He began with that. I mean, I don't think we actually did get a lot of detail on how he plans to close the $10 billion gap in the state budget, but clearly, but we got sort of the outlines of it and sense of the kind of ambition that he sort of wants to be seen as bringing to it.
You mentioned what President Obama, or really it was his Chief of Staff, Rahm Emanuel, said coming into office. The speech made me think of when President Clinton and Vice President Gore came into office in 1992 with a big federal budget deficit at that time, and they tried to frame what they were going to do not in kind of Republican terms of cutting government because government is bad, but of reinventing government. Because in order for government to be good, it needed to be cost effective. Did it remind you of that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, he talked a lot about his time serving Bill Clinton. I mean, I think he's probably talked more about that than about his last job as Attorney General. Yeah, and I do think that's the model, sort of a smarter, smaller government that works. But it was striking. I mean, in the model was not his father, which is a larger, sort of more expansive government. And he basically signaled with all his talk about how taxes are too high that he plans to, close this deficit entirely, or would like to try to close it entirely by cutting. I think, to some extent that's an opening gambit with the state assembly that's going to want to raise taxes.
And yet I thought he was channeling his father, or being in the spirit of his father to some degree. Like, he didn't really sound like Chris Christie in New Jersey, who really seems to relish cutting government. That's what he was elected to do. Chris Christie keeps saying he's not shy about it. Governor Cuomo was still speaking in terms of the progressive vision for New York State, and he used that word, progressive. And he was still talking like his father did about what government can do for people, and that he wanted to return New York State to being able to do that in an effective way. So I think even though he comes with cut, 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 and maybe he's going to cut in very similar ways to Chris Christie because he feels he has no choice, I still felt that the ethic at the root of it was very different, and that he did come from his father.
Absolutely. There's a passage about it. A couple of the passages that struck me as the kind of most authentic, in a way, passages of the speech were this part toward the end about sort of maintaining the social compact that was very much his father. And also, I mean, you just get this, Chris Christie relishes picking a fight with public workers. Andrew Cuomo did no union bashing, and although he is picking a fight with public workers of necessity, isn't trying to signal that this is something he likes, and isn't trying to make them a punching bag, or at least was not in this speech. The part of the line that it seemed to me that got the biggest applause, that he enjoyed delivering the most, was about how state prisons shouldn't be, we shouldn't imprison people as an excuse to give jobs to prison guards,
right?
Which is fundamentally a pretty liberal approach, but that was the line to me that he really delivered with the most vigor.
Yes, although people will quickly forget that Governor Patterson, I think, did a very good job in starting to reinvent the juvenile justice system after the scandals had come to light about the treatment in some of those juvenile justice facilities. So I think that actually really started and took many major steps under Patterson, and it will be to Cuomo to continue that, but not to launch it. Do you think that he set himself up in opposition to the state legislature? Is that where the fight is going to be?
Inevitably, that's where the fight is going to be, but I think he was very careful not to pick a fight with him, and I think the lesson he learned from Eliot Spitzer was, that they can just sort of wait you out. Like, no matter how much sort of steamrolling mandate you come in with, you cannot just yell at these legislators who are just perfectly safe in their districts and really don't fear you, as Spitzer felt that they should. So no, he invited Shelley Silver to introduce him. I think there was this really sort of, there was this attempt to gesture at harmony. At the same time, inevitably there's going to be conflict. And I think the central one may be over the expiration of the millionaire's tax.
Right, which Shelley Silver in the Assembly will want to allow to expire, that is, for taxes to go up on people making $200,000 or $500,000 plus.
Well, they'd like to keep it in place. They'd like to keep the surcharge in place.
Correct. Correct. The Assembly would like to keep the surcharge in place. Now, it seemed to me that the governor tried to align himself with the other two leaders, the Assembly Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader, the famous three men in a room who make the budget, aligned the three of them against what he called the special interests. Let's watch this animation that he used during the State of the State, and we'll see who he feels the enemy is.
We need to transform the budget process that we use in the state. The legislature is very familiar with the budget process. And we need to transform this process from partisan political theater, which is what it is today, to productive debate and compromise. Right now, the budget process is like ships passing in the night. Hold on a second. Bring those ships back. I think I recognized someone. Is that? Zoom in on that man on that battleship. Yes, it is. Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos. And look, it's Commander Sheldon Silver. Oh, and there I am. And here are the special interest groups within... You notice, Dean, how all the missiles from the special interest groups went into my battleship.
Video from New York 1. We see the missiles went into his battleship. What is he trying to say there, Ben Smith?
Well, I think he's trying to say that he's ready for a fight, and what he didn't say is he's raised a ton of money from the real estate industry to shoot missiles back at the labor unions, who are the special interest in question there, I think, who are the ones who went after his predecessors when they tried to cut. So I think, he was sort of showing that he was ready for a fight. I mean, it's amazing how the kind of internet style of these kind of crude drawings has spilled over now into the State of the State speech. It's very of the moment.
We'll be talking later in the show about how video games have kind of redesigned the visual aesthetic for almost everything we do, and I think we saw the perfect example of that right there. But
that was like a video game from 10 years ago, but yeah.
Yes, or 15. We got to go in a minute, but the special interests, he said that term, spoke that term over and over again, and he never did say who the special interests were. And I think you just made a very important point, because usually when the typical New York viewer thinks special interests, they probably think of various corporations and industries. Of course, public sector unions spend more on lobbying than probably any other sector in New York State. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But he was talking overwhelmingly about the unions, his own state workers?
I think so. And when you're talking about, missiles headed for governors, that's been the tradition. I mean, that's who he seems likeliest to cross here. I mean, certainly also, various corporate lobbies and energy lobbies and whoever else he'll be picking fights with. But no, I think that was the gist of it. Though he did choose not to go after them, where Republican governors around the country right now are making public unions like the very public scapegoats and picking these public fights, and he has so far chosen not to.
Ben Smith from Politico, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's the State of the State. But how's it going to play in Brooklyn? Tonight, as the new decade begins, we start a special series, The State of the Boroughs. This week, Brooklyn. Now, before we look into what needs fixing, here's the upside, what the Borough President's Office posted on YouTube to get us to move to Brooklyn.
Come back to Brooklyn, that's the place to be. Come back to Brooklyn on the BMT. Or take the West End line to Old Bay Ridge. Or take a stroll across the Brooklyn Bridge. Oh, come out to Coney, watch the polar bears defy the icy foam. Come back to Brooklyn, to good old Brooklyn, and make that borough your home. Get out to Sheepshead Bay and Brooklyn Heights. It's very pretty and it's not too far. Or across the river where the churches are old.
You hear that Brooklyn accent fill the air, most anywhere you roam.
Come back to Brooklyn, to good old Brooklyn, and make that borough your home. Come back to Brooklyn, it's the thing to do. Come back to Brooklyn where a tree once grew. Come back to Brooklyn, everybody does.
Come Back to Brooklyn, sung by Jimmy Roselli, and many have come. 2.5 million people now live in the city's most populous borough, an increase of 100,000 in the last 10 years, according to the new census. Its neighborhoods are growing and changing too, in part because established immigrants move on up and new immigrants move on in. New York Magazine created this map from the latest census data, and you can see that, for example, Italian Bensonhurst is becoming more South Asian. It's those magenta dots in the middle. Sunset Park is getting more Mexican. That's the orange dots to the left. And Flatbush and Sheepshead Bay, those areas with lots of yellowish dots, are getting more Muslim and Arab at the very same time that the Jewish population is growing. And it's probably not news to you that over the decade, gentrification has continued in western Brooklyn, with the African-American population falling in places like Prospect Heights and Fort Greene, while rising in southeastern Brooklyn, Canarsie, for example. The poverty rate is still above 20% in Kings County, but unemployment is down from a high of 11.2% a year ago to 9.9%. So where is Brooklyn headed? How can it strike a better balance between big development and the human scale, transportation versus pollution, and better serve young and old, rich and poor? We are delighted to have Brooklyn's Borough President, Marty Markowitz, join us for this edition of State of the Boroughs. Mr. Borough President, welcome.
Thank you for having me, and let me present, even though you don't live in Brooklyn yet, your official Brooklyn winter cap.
I am honored, and I will wear it proudly.
Great.
You saw some clips from the State of the State.
You missed big things out of that.
Like what?
The Asian population. The Chinese population is bursting at its seams. And Sunset Park, yes, indeed, an increase in the Mexican population, but an even larger increase in the Chinese population, not just in Sunset Park, but in parts of Bensonhurst dramatically, and in Sheepshead Bay. In fact, I predict that the Chinese population will be a major, major part of the future of Brooklyn and New York City. So I'm very excited about the demographic changes, by and large.
And so is there going to be a new Brooklyn accent, or are they all going to talk like you in 10 years?
By the way, I don't have an accent, Brian.
I forgot.
Let's understand that I speak to King's English, Kings County, and it's my dialect that's right, not everyone else. But having said that, there is no Brooklyn accent, except for a few neighborhoods in and around Brooklyn. It's the accent of America, and it's the accent of the world. It truly is.
There you go. You saw the clips from the State of the State that we played. Do you fear that Governor Cuomo may not be fair to Brooklyn? And what would a fair shake be for Brooklyn in the new state budget? Have you thought about that?
Yes, having 75% of the state budget given to Brooklyn. I think that's fair.
That would be fair.
Well, whatever he gives us is not enough. That's the real fairness. But obviously, listen, we have to be concerned, as every other part of New York State, New York City has to be concerned. I'm particularly worried about education, mass transit, Medicaid. What's going to happen to the future of our hospitals system in New York City and in Brooklyn in particular? How does this impact people of low income and people that are mature? So there's lots of questions, but he's got a full plate of challenges, that's for sure. And luckily, our state legislators, both in the state Senate and the Assembly, although I'm very sad that the train passes by with the Senate Democrats losing their majority incredibly and putting us back in minority status. I was in Albany as a state senator for 23 years. Never experienced majority. They finally got it. Gone.
Do you think, with your experience as a 23-year legislator, that the legislature is the problem, either in overspending or in poor ethics, as many people say?
Overwhelmingly, the men and women that are elected in the legislature are good, honest, hardworking people. They are. You're always going to get a few crumb bums in every profession there is in America. The difference is that the press focuses on the crumb bums in the legislature, and all the other thieves and crooks in the rest of society barely get mentioned. But having said that, even one crumb bum in government elected is intolerable, and any efforts that the governor can make, together with the new attorney general, to minimize, mitigate, eliminate corruption is in the benefit for all of us. No question about it.
All right, here's a question. Is all the snow gone?
Well, we still have some snow. And I'm going to tell you, as crazy as it sounds, even last Saturday and Sunday, I still had calls from different neighborhoods waiting for a plow. They still had not seen a plow.
Saturday and Sunday.
I know it sounds incredible, crazy, but true. So something happened here, Brian Lehrer. Something happened here that I'm hoping that the city council investigators and the mayor's own internal reviews will try to figure out so this never happens again to the residents of Brooklyn or the rest of New York City.
Now, wait, here's a little bit of Borough Park. We're going to show Borough Park a few days ago. I certainly was not Saturday and Sunday. Let's roll this video. You can see it there. And really, parts of Brooklyn probably got hit the hardest by the slow pace of digging out. Word is you may be interested in running for mayor in 2013. If you ever become mayor, is there a lesson from this?
Well, first off, I'm not in the mayor's seat, and as far as a possible mayoral run, I think it's most unlikely, I have to tell you. Therefore, I can clearly say that we have to find out where the mistakes were made, who made those mistakes, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again. Clearly, I know one thing. East 72nd Street in Manhattan was, the snow was gone a lot quicker than it was on East 79th Street in Canarsie in Brooklyn, or 79th Street in Bay Ridge. So the question is, or in Bensonhurst. So the question is, how do we make sure that in the future that our 5 boroughs are treated equally with equal love, or perhaps being treated the same? They have to be treated the same way, and that the sanitation department and those responsible make sure that they're on high alert for any potential snowstorm, including one that may be coming later this week, over the weekend. So we have to be ready for it. The bottom line is, I don't care how good looking you are. I don't care how much money you got. I don't care how brilliant you are. Here's what the residents say: clean the snow, period. You got basic responsibilities when you're mayor, or even at my modest level, get it done. That's it.
We have a video later in the show of City Councilman David Greenfield showing an intersection, Ocean Parkway and Parkville Avenue.
Yes.
And I guess you know about this. He's highlighting what appear to be bike lanes plowed while some streets aren't plowed. And we know this is an issue that you're passionate about too. Have you seen that video?
Yes, indeed, I have.
And did that actually happen?
Well, what he pointed out, Ocean Parkway actually, and that's the bicycle lanes and the pedestrian lanes. So obviously he felt, and I could understand, before you get onto the pedestrian lanes on the Ocean Parkway service lanes, let's get rid of the snow in your regular streets. And he has a legitimate point there. 2 different departments. It's the Parks Department that does the Ocean Parkway malls, and it's the Sanitation Department that does the streets.
Including
so
the bike lanes that the Parks Department does?
The bike lanes on Prospect Park West, which I vehemently oppose, the cleaning of that is the responsibility of the Sanitation Department. But the park drives in Prospect Park, responsibility of Parks Department.
And just for the fun of it, I'm sure you've seen this. Here are some bicycle advocates, knowing your reputation on the bike lanes, presenting you with a Christmas present.
That's true. I wasn't there, by the way. I was at a rally in Borough Park opposing the medians that the Transportation Commissioner and her department placed in the middle of Fort Hamilton Parkway, right near Maimonides Hospitals. Crazy, insane, and it will endanger lives. It will endanger lives, no question about it.
That's a bike lane down the middle?
No, what they did is they build these pedestrian safety. But really what it does, it squeezes cars from 2 lanes to 1 lane with a medium in the middle. God forbid an ambulance has to get to Maimonides Hospital and traffic is on both sides. That person could die. There's no question about it. But that's not the point. What the Department of Transportation is doing since 2007 under the current leadership is one thing. the social re-engineering of our streets. It's not about safety. It's about social re-engineering. What can we do to force people out of automobiles? How can we stigmatize them? How can we minimize them? How do we get them off? That's what this is all about.
So as a matter of policy, in a city where NYC 2030, Plan YC 2030 projects 1 million more people, we know traffic gets worse and worse all the time, there are the environmental and global warming questions. As a matter of policy, is it not a good thing to try to get people out of their cars?
Is it a matter of public policy to make New York City like Beijing of 1940? It's a legitimate question that I think should not be left to a commissioner, the whims of a commissioner and one department. It's a legitimate public policy issue that should be decided, I believe, by a wider democracy, which means the city government, city council should weigh in on this and make those kind of decisions. Now, I'm not opposed to bike lanes where it works for the residents, for the bikers, for motorists, for pedestrians, retailers where appropriate. I'm not opposed to it. I would never have opposed a traditional bike lane on Prospect Park West. I think it's fine with me, but that's not what they've done. They've taken a beautiful thoroughfare, one of the most beautiful in this city, and now you got parking in the middle of the street. It's caused greater traffic congestion, greater environmental issues, and puts people at greater risk, in my humble opinion. And by the way, while we're talking, cars are getting cleaner. So if you're going to project to 2030, let's talk about where the car industry is going. Hybrids, electric. That's the future, as cars will become less and less cause of pollution.
Last thing, we're in a time of crisis all over the country, jobs certainly in Brooklyn as elsewhere. The president makes policy, then the governor makes policy, then the mayor makes policy. What can a borough president actually do to move things forward?
The bully pulpit, advocating, promoting, trying to form coalitions. So basically, and pitching companies as I do. By the way, I'll use your show. Why isn't Apple in Brooklyn? I'm still waiting, but I choose corporations. I write to international corporations that think about making Brooklyn their home. But I have to tell you something. To me, my greatest fear, America is becoming a second-tier nation. We're no longer making anything anymore. You can't exist as a vibrant country if you don't make things anymore. Almost everything that America, that you and I buy, is being made somewhere else. And so therefore, we don't have those entry-level jobs except retail for those that may not have the skills or may not have the education. And as much as we want every child to get a PhD, the truth of the matter is that not every young person will. And you have to have the jobs there for the people with PhDs and those that can learn to work with their hands or learn skills. And we have to get back to manufacturing. One way or the other, America must get back to manufacturing.
The state of the borough, according to the president of Brooklyn, Marty Markowitz. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Here are this week's online video picks. Number 1. The blizzard of 2010 was an event that was deadly to some, inconvenient to many, and damaging to Mayor Bloomberg's reputation. But as it turns out, it was also an occasion for at least one beautiful work of art. This is from a video called Idiot with a Tripod by Jamie Stewart, shot in Astoria, Queens, that the film critic Roger Ebert somehow got to see and called it worthy of an Oscar. Man in a Blizzard by Jamie Stewart, all done on home video equipment, by the way, a Canon 7D camera and a computer with the Final Cut Pro editing program. Video pick number 2 may not be such a great work of Blizzard art, but it's gotten a lot more views, nearly 3 million at last check, because people love seeing this tow truck having and causing trouble in the snow.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Are you f***ing kidding me? You just crushed that car. Oh my God. Are you out of your mind? What are you doing? Are they out of their mind? That is insane. That is absolutely insane.
3 million views of Schadenfreude, courtesy of JCK42 via Gawker TV, and it looks bad, especially to the owner of that poor Ford Expedition. But I do wonder who among us could have done better under those conditions. Video pick number 3, and we're staying with Blizzard outrage here. This time it's Brooklyn City Councilman David Greenfield, live in the snow at the corner of Ocean Parkway and Parkville Avenue.
I want the world to see what's happening here in my district. I'm here sitting in Flatbush on the corner of Parkville Avenue and Ocean Parkway. Right over here we have an oil truck. This is a common problem that we've heard from literally dozens of constituents who are running out of oil. Oil cannot be delivered to their homes. It's a very simple problem. An oil truck like this cannot get down side streets. And so all across Borough Park, Flatbush, Midwood, what we have is a situation where we have many people who haven't gotten oil. I had a constituent who called me yesterday crying to me, begging to please clear her streets because her elderly tenants and tenants who have children would not have heat last night. This is crazy. It's unacceptable. The city cannot function this way. But I just want people to see what's going on over here in New York City. Number one priority for New York City today, bike lanes. Is that normal? Bike lanes are the number one priority. 90% of my constituents' streets have not been cleared, and the number one priority is bike lanes. Look at this fire truck over here getting stuck in traffic. Look at this fire truck. Ocean Parkway, one of the largest highways, one of the largest parkways in New York City, has turned into a parking lot.
All right, enough with the blizzard. Video pick number 4, posted by The Mobile Future, documents how iPad service and the rest of the mobile internet started dominating our online lives in 2010.
In 2010, location-based services dominated. 2009, 200,000 Foursquare users. 2010, 5 million users. And one check-in from an astronaut in space. In 2010, social media continued the move to mobile. 347% growth in Twitter mobile usage. 200 million mobile Facebook users. 100 million YouTube videos played on mobile devices every day. In 2010, half of all page views were to social network sites. Growth in one company's data traffic since 2008, 3,000%. Cell phones and desktop internet connected 1 billion people and devices, with a projected 40 times growth by 2015. The digital camera died in 2010. Your mobile phone is looking very guilty. February 2010, iPhone becomes most popular camera on Flickr. 2010, 76% of adults use their phone to take pictures. That includes your mom, by the way. In 2010, we learned that these app things aren't just all fun and games. In 2010, there was an app for just about everything. While those apps are great, the kids still love to text. 3,339, mind-blowing, average number of texts sent per month by U.S. teens. For mobile carriers, 2010 was competitive enough to make Darwin blush. 96% of mobile users can choose from 3 or more providers. 92% are satisfied with their providers. Lowest rate per minute of 22 developed nations. Record 77 million smartphones shipped in the fall of 2010 alone. Plus, there's always this. 2009, 3G mobile internet on Mount Everest? No. 2010, 3G mobile internet on Mount Everest? Yup. But let's talk about the monies. Jobs created by mobile industry, 2.4 million. Money invested by wireless providers in 1 year, 20.4 billion. Fun fact, if you like good news and money, average wireless industry job paid 50% above the national average. To review, 2010 meant more usage, more data, more handsets, more apps, more developers, more competition, more mobile.
And video pick number 5 from Kianga Ellis in the heart of Harlem. It's artist Nate Hill on December 15th as Punch Me Panda. Aggression and love, all in one huggable, punchable package. And those are this week's online video picks. From Farmville to World of Warcraft, video games have become a big part of our leisure time. But it turns out that games are growing in significance in other parts of our lives as well, from education to personal health. How are games infiltrating everyday life, online and off? Well, Adam Penenberg took his readers into the post-joystick world with a fascinating story in Fast Company magazine, where he's a contributing writer. He's also a journalism professor at NYU. Thanks for coming. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So we know that we're playing games online, etc., but you wanted to make a point, what, about games and brain science, how our brains work?
Well, that's part of it. But the point I'm making in the story is that games are encroaching into every aspect of our lives. And this idea of game mechanics, which is the thing that makes games so addictive for so many people, are being layered into all sorts of things, from marketing to health to education to politics to the military and beyond.
Game mechanics, meaning?
Well, the things that make games so irresistible to people. I mean, if you look at the numbers, I mean, they're staggering. For example, 350 million people every week play games, and they play for some 3 billion hours a week worldwide. 97% of people under the age of 21 play games. These are staggering figures. Why do they do it? Well, games are a little bit like gambling, or, believe it or not, your brain reacts the same way when you're playing a video game as if you were on crack cocaine. It's addictive in the same way that slot machines are addictive, because it triggers your dopamine response, and we love it when we trigger our dopamine response.
And is this new? I mean, kids under 21 have always played games. You know, grown men and women play different kinds of games. Is this new as a result of video game or computer game technology?
What's new is the ways that game mechanics and games are being layered into all aspects of our lives. For example, take that Tropicana orange juice container in your refrigerator. It says on it, if you check, worth 3 points. What does that mean? You can actually redeem those points for things. That's a game. What's Weight Watchers but a game? What are American Express rewards points but a game? There's things are being layered into all aspects of our lives, and marketers are certainly looking to, well, trigger our dopamine responses.
And in fact, you start your piece with a reference to a talk by a Carnegie Mellon professor named Jesse Schell, in which he imagines how technology could enable corporations to basically bring games that are essentially advertising into every moment of our day. Do you see this happening to some extent already, and are you concerned by it?
I'm concerned only that I think that people are confusing what I would call the pointsification of life versus the gamification of life. And pointsification is just giving points to people to try to induce them to do things. We'll give you 10 points if you brush your teeth. We'll give you 20 points if you take the bus to work instead of taking your car, so it's good for the environment. I'm not so sure that people are going to play those kinds of games because they're so bold and they're so in your face. But I do think that ways that we can excite people about learning in schools, for example, education, it's a big area for gamification. The military are using simulations for all sorts of things, from fixing tanks to actually, piloting Predator drones.
Is money a game in this respect?
Well, I think money is the ultimate reward for many of these companies that are doing it. That's not shocking, obviously. Money is driving a huge aspect of this, but there's also this idea that if we can excite people, for example, changing the workplace. If you work at a call center and it's a really boring job, you could actually put these people inside a video game as they do their jobs, and they would probably be a lot happier and more productive, and they would enjoy work a lot more, and they would do a better job of it.
There's a game called Scavenger. It's spelled like scavenger, but without the vowels, as you know, that I think is somewhat based on this principle. You want to tell us about that?
Scavenger is a company what the goal of the 22-year-old founder of the company, a Princeton dropout, he's proud to say that, is that he wants to create a game layer around the world. And his idea is basically it's a mobile app. And you check into certain places and you get points for this, points for that. I don't know whether it's more of a pointsification concept or a gamification concept. We'll have to see on that. He's convinced, and he just raised $15 million more in venture capital that just happened. So we'll have to see whether it works out for him. It may.
Maybe he's the next Mark Zuckerberg, and after we have the Googleization of the internet and now the Facebookization of the internet, we'll have the scavengerization from search to social media to games as the organizing principle. Who knows? You write about Jane McGonigal, Director of Games Research and Development at the Institute for the Future, who believes that games can be used to help foster social goals, reducing hunger and poverty, climate change, things like that. Are there any such games, and is that a reasonable vision?
It's very interesting. When I first heard her vision, I was very skeptical, but after having interviewed her and, done more research, and I just read her book, which just came out or is about to come out, and she makes a pretty compelling argument, because if you look at the way, take kids. By the age of 21, people will have spent between 2,000 and 3,000 hours of their lives reading books, but more than 10,000 hours playing video games. And if you listen to Malcolm Gladwell, 10,000 hours is the threshold to become a virtuoso or expert. In essence, we have raised a whole generation of video game and game experts. And her vision is that if they could take the things that makes games so incredibly addictive and so compelling to people, where they level up and they solve problems, there's constant problem solving in these things. If you can take that, harness it, we could solve some of the biggest problems of our lives, from global warming to violence to war to famine and things like that.
We're just about out of time, but is there a quick example of that you could give, like a 20-second example?
Yeah, she has a game based on oil that she worked up with the World Bank, where imagining your lives without oil, what would you do? And every person has to react, and of course, the better they do at the game shows the types of solutions they come up with.
So after you do it as an avatar, then maybe you take it into real life.
That's the idea.
Thank you for joining us. Interesting
Thanks
stuff.
for having me.
Coming up, what your DNA has to say about your future, and do you really want to know?
Movement. weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY Leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services. To find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNYLeads. CUNY Leads, to the career I always wanted.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bagging lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
In the not-too-distant future, we will likely make vital life choices based on our genetic makeup. Our DNA might tell us who to have kids with, what medicines to avoid, and how we will die. The branch of science studying this is called Personal Genomics, and Harvard University's Personal Genome Project is on the cutting edge. Here is a minute from a documentary about that project.
In the summer of 2007, 10 people gave samples of their blood, saliva, skin cells, disease, and lifestyle information. They also agreed to have their genomes sequenced and posted on the internet for all the world to see.
Cardiac hypertrophy, is that the condition that often kills athletes in their prime?
Yes, yes.
So I have the rare version.
You do presumably have the rare version.
How our lives will unfold in public will foreshadow how the public views learning their own genomic information.
People are saying that the future of the genome is 20 years from now. I say it's happening now.
That from an upcoming documentary by Marilyn Ness. One of the subjects of that you saw in that clip is Misha Angrist. He is a professor of genetics at Duke University who decided to become an experimental subject himself so he could understand the issues at the heart of personal genomics firsthand. His experience has resulted in a book, Here is a Human Being, at the Dawn of Personal Genomics. Misha Angrist joins us now. Hello, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're a scientist. Why did you want to become a subject? That's pretty unusual.
I'm a scientist by training, that's true. I haven't been at the bench for a number of years. But when I was at the bench, I was in a human genetics lab studying a genetic disease, and we used to get phone calls from family members. And I remember feeling this kind of strange detachment that even though we were looking at these people's blood and saliva and DNA every day, there was kind of a disconnect. And I spent many years on one side of the pipette, and I wanted to be on the other.
So can I ask, what did you learn, most importantly, about your own DNA? Good things, bad things, instructive things?
Well, your genome is 6 billion base pairs. You get 3 billion from each parent. Most of it, we have no idea what it means. There's a small part of it that we do understand, and which is profound. In my case, there were some good things. I learned that I don't carry the most common genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's, which was nice to know. I was actually corresponding with a guy yesterday who runs a website called Snipedia that is kind of a do-it-yourself genome interpretation site, and I saw a new marker that suggests that I am more susceptible to the placebo effect, which I thought was interesting. And then, of course, I wondered, is that something that's good for me to know? Because now that I know, it's like that old Steve Martin routine where he says, I found this great new drug called placebo.
The placebo effect, of course, works on sort of the power of suggestion. If you don't know that something isn't the real drug, it's just a little sugar pill or something, it might make you feel better anyway. But yeah, once you know you're subject to the placebo effect or susceptible to it, does that negate it? Well, that's a small example of something we may or may not want to know.
Right.
How about that Alzheimer's example? So you've got good news. Why would somebody who's 30 or 40 or 50 years old want to know that they do have a genetic predisposition to getting Alzheimer's later in life?
Well, that's an excellent question. It's one that's been addressed over the last decade plus by a guy named Robert Green at Boston University, who's a neurologist and geneticist, who's done a very long set of clinical trials about what happens when you tell people, asymptomatic, healthy people, what their genetic risk for Alzheimer's is. And one of the things that they found was a surprising number of people actually want to know. And people who get bad news, yes, they get bummed out, depressed, but they recover.
And it's only worth it if there is some kind of treatment or preventive behavior that can help you minimize the risk?
Well, no. So now we get into something that he and I and other people like to call personal utility, which is physicians often refer to diagnostic tests in terms of their clinical utility. That is, can you do something medically with the knowledge that your patient is at risk? Personal utility is whether you can do something medically or not. Do you want to know? Will it help you? Is there any reason that you would want to know? And what people at risk for Alzheimer's have said is, listen, we want to know because we want to make plans. We may want to live our lives differently. We may want to sort some stuff out. So
that's another reason to know.
Yeah.
You write in the book about a strange coincidence. You spent many years studying the genetics of a rare birth defect called Hirschsprung's disease, and then your nephew was born with that rare birth defect. Tell us about that.
Right. So when I was in graduate school, I spent 8 years studying Hirschsprung's disease, which is a congenital defect of the intestine where the nerve cells that populate the intestine don't, and so it leads to constipation and bloating and life-threatening infections. We were interested because it's a model for sort of complex disease, and by that I mean a disease that is caused by some mix of genes and environment. And I stopped those studies in 1998, and in 2005 my brother and his wife had a son with Hirschsprung's disease, and it was indeed an extraordinary coincidence.
Has your experience of being a test subject